Welcome back to Autism Live. I have on the phone and on Skype right now Bonnie Yates from the law firm of Hirji and Chow. And Bonnie is an amazing special education attorney. Bonnie, good morning.
Good morning.
I love this scarf you got going on.
You want to know the true story of the scarf?
Okay.
I think my daughter's given away more clothes than anybody I know. True story. The scarf.
And so did this come from her?
Throwing my beloved daughter under the bus.
Why is that throwing her under the bus? If she's giving clothes away, that's a wonderful, generous thing.
Well, it's a snarky comment about how much we all consume.
Well, there is that. But if you're consuming it and giving it away, then that makes you a great benefactor. People are happy.
Yeah, well, we're repurposing the Penelope Helen Yates collection today.
I love that. I absolutely love that. So Bonnie, tell us a little bit about Hirji and Chow.
Hirji and Chow is an education law firm in Culver City. We represent kids from, essentially 0 to the end of the adult lifespan. We assist with the regional center, school district, higher education matters that involve disability discrimination. And we're a 6-attorney firm in Southern California.
Okay. And we also give a disclaimer at the start of the show when you're on about the nature of the suggestions that you give. So
we're going to give the disclaimer and a shout out.
Okay.
And a shout out. The disclaimer is we're answering your questions per California law and federal law. So if you're in another state and if you have a specific problem, you should consult the COPA list, COPAA.net, for an attorney in your state. It's not a guarantee, but generally these people are well versed in special ed matters.
Wonderful.
Okay, here's the shout out.
Okay.
In something like 1 week, we went from being a 3-attorney firm to a 6-attorney firm, and I'm really excited about that. The way that happened is, first of all, Devin Brothers, who passed the bar 3 or 4 years ago, but was working in one of the southern states, decided that it was really a lot more enjoyable to practice in California, so she joined the firm. And then this was the really, really good thing. Like maybe a few days before Thanksgiving, at about 10:30 at night, it was a Friday before Thanksgiving, I found out that both of our law school grads passed the bar on their first time, Diana Maltz and Alex Rodriguez. And the pass rate was hovering around 40%. And I was just so pleased because both of these people have been amazingly capable new attorneys, and they seem way more confident than I ever felt and way more capable of just attacking big problems. And they both passed, and that was really great. So we didn't have to have the whole office problem of, gee, she passed and he didn't, or vice versa. So we've gone from being a 3-attorney firm to a 6-attorney firm, and I can't tell you how much I like that when I think about the fact that the school district knows that there are 6 of us. So stay tuned about that. Nobody's going to pay for us to death.
I love it.
So that's the shout out.
I love it. You've been lean and mean, and now you're plump and fancy. I love it.
Yeah, well, I've always been plump, but that's a different topic anyway. We won't go there.
Let's not go there. Let's not go there because I don't want to talk about how plump I am. Okay, so I've got some questions for you, Bonnie. Shall I jump right in?
Please.
Okay, so I feel like the goals on my first grade son's IEP are too easy. He has ASD, but is smart. Do I need an educational consultant or a lawyer?
Okay. He has ASD, but is smart. No, he has ASD and is smart. Many of the children that we work with who have autism spectrum disorder have IQs that are above normal, and I've got several now that are above 130. Okay, so the problem with that is that districts that have kids that have high IQs with a disability don't seem to get beyond the fact of the high IQ. And I don't entirely fault them for this. I mean, if they're in awe of the intelligence of somebody that has an IQ of 130 or 143, as one of my kids does, hey, I'm right there with them. You know, like, I want to sit at your feet and see what your amazing brain can do. But at the same time, we now know it's possible to be gifted and disabled. And so, you know, it may be that for sincere reasons, they are writing the goals in a manner that's too easy. I mean, I don't know why they would write them to be too easy if they're overemphasizing his intelligence. But if they are too easy, I mean, we see that a lot because districts have to be accountable on goals. So we see them, you know, saying things like, well, the classroom teacher is going to work on it, so we don't need to write a goal. Well, you got to say no to that, because if it's an area of unique need, you need it to be measured, and it won't be measured unless there's a goal. She's asking, you know, what do I need to do to make the goals be appropriate him for a year from now? And I guess my first question is, do you have an outside source, let's say the BCBA from your home ABA program, or a neuropsychologist, someone who's going to be able to help you write appropriate goals based on your present levels of performance? You need that. And then she's asking, do I need an educational consultant, or do I need a lawyer? I mean, a well-trained and knowledgeable advocate can certainly assist you with attempting to write goals that are measurable, but they shouldn't be the source necessarily of what the goals are going to be, because I don't know that they're in the position to know. With that said, I did recently dial up, and I can't remember whether we talked about it on the program or not, but I Googled accommodations for children with autism, and there is a lot of stuff now on the internet about goals, you know, goal banks and things like that for kids with autism. But really, you need to have in mind what you want them to be able to do in a year, and then the goals have to be measurable. They have to be understandable and measurable. And when you get into understandable, there's a lot of gobbledygook. When you get into measurable, it's hard to measure if you have too many things in the goal. It's hard to measure if the prompt hierarchy isn't specified, and so on. So I don't know that you need a lawyer for this project, but what I will suggest to you is, if the goals are too low, there's probably other problems too, and that might require a more macro look at the whole case, and that might involve at least a consultation with an attorney, most of whom will, you know, do an initial consultation for free. So those would be a couple ways to go at it.
Okay. I love that. Thank you so much. Second question, I am so done with my daughter's school. I want to take her out and have them pay for private school. How do I do this?
Okay. Private school. We're seeing more and more private school cases because there aren't enough good public options. There's more or less a template for how you do a unilateral private placement case, and this is what it looks like. In order to justify placing a child in a private school, you have to show that the district's offer was not appropriate. And then you have to show that the child made good progress in the private school. So how do you do that? Well, you have to either go to the IEP team meeting and indicate that you think that the child isn't making progress and can't make progress in a public placement, and the district has 10 business days to 10 business days to make another placement offer. They're entitled to time to make another placement offer. And after that point, theoretically, you should be able to privately place. The thing is, administrative law judges are not going to be too happy with a parent that sort of singularly and without expertise pulls their child out of school. So in the perfect case, which almost never happens, but we had one this week, parents said, we want an RTC, residential treatment center. They already went through this with their older son. They spent about $300,000. Now it seems like the younger child's going to need a similar placement. We're trying to avoid the expense. I said, well, if you want to do this in a bulletproof way, you won't place him until you've had an outside evaluation by a neuropsychologist and you have to give the district time to assess as well. They're entitled to assess. You have to make the child available for assessment. And then what you're going to do is you're going to write the district a letter or have an IEP meeting, and based on the report findings and the recommendation of the neuropsych, she or he is going to recommend residential treatment and not or private school, whatever it is, rather than it coming from the parents, because the parents, the parents are suspect as far as the administrative law judge goes, and administrative law judge doesn't really believe that parents should be making these decisions without expertise. So it's a little bit of a process. Then once we get the kiddo placed, we are going to ask for at least 1 quarter. Well, once we get in place, the first thing I'm going to do is get baselines from either the testing or stuff I set up with the school. And then we're going to require at least 1 quarter of strong improvement data to show that what we picked instead was appropriate, and the child made progress. So you can do this. It's obviously much easier to do if you have a bad history and there are a lot of violations. The way you do it is after that improvement data time period has passed, you file for due process on the grounds that the district didn't offer a FAPE, and you seek reimbursement for the private placement. It'll probably resolve by settlement. If it doesn't, and the hearing officer makes an order that the parent is entitled to reimbursement, that operates as the stay put. So that's how you do it.
Okay, I stopped for a second to plug phone in because phone was dying. So thanks for bearing with me there.
No problema.
That's wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next question then. My 15-year-old daughter is, and we don't know what the rest of that sentence was, I got moved to a different program. It is an SD class for autism, but it's all boys. I think that's inappropriate. I want a mix of girls and boys. Is that possible? We're seeing more and more of this, Bonnie, and I always feel bad for the parents of kiddos that are girls on the spectrum, because I've heard this complaint from moms many times before that they're looking for a program or a classroom for their daughter, and there are a lot of things that are right about the placement, except that it's the rest of the class is all boys. Do parents have any, can a parent object to the setting based on that?
I didn't do the research, and I still could. I just didn't have time. I think it's going to be really hard to argue that a male gendered classroom is a denial of FAPE per se. You would really want to show how, by not having girls in the classroom, you couldn't meet the unique needs of the student. And it occurs to me that one way possibly to have that peer exposure is through mainstreaming. The reason we have 4-1 or 5-1 boys in autism classrooms has to do with the fact that autism is disproportionately a male disorder. I just don't know if, for policy reasons, you're going to get a judge to agree that the classroom ratios have to change, because I think it's kind of impossible to easily anyway create a gender balanced special day class when we know that the autism distribution is not equal between the sexes.
Yeah, it's almost like, is there anything that's possible about that? But it's an interesting...
But you could certainly have an IEP meeting to discuss the issue. Has that been done?
Well, we don't know based on the question, and it sounds like, because the person says that they got moved to a different program, it sounds like it's a fairly recent placement in this SD classroom. So perhaps...
Maybe they want to write us and give us some more facts, and we can come back to the question next week.
We'll put that out to them. Okay, the last question this week is, my son has OCD, and the principal believes in flooding, which is driving my kids nuts. What are my kiddos' rights? And so you and I were having a little conversation about this separate. For people who don't know, we talk about this a lot on the show with Dr. Doreen Grampiche, that when people have sensory issues or OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, there is a technique. There are a couple of techniques used frequently to combat this. One is systematic desensitization, and we talk about that on the show all the time, about a very slow moving way to desensitize whatever it is that is causing anxiety with the individual. So if somebody is for instance, afraid of loud noises, that we would start by having the noise very, very small in the background playing, and we would very slowly over a period of time inch it up so that the person would very slowly get accustomed to this sound and build up a tolerance, so to speak. Flooding is when you put somebody in a circumstance where not only are they getting the stimulus that is upsetting to them, but they're getting like a mega dose of it. It's the equivalent of throwing somebody in the deep end of the swimming pool and hoping
Right.
that they swim. And sometimes that works for some people. But for other people, it can be very anxiety provoking. We were talking about the example that if somebody's afraid of snakes, with the systematic desensitization, you would start by having a picture of a snake, a small snake across the room, have the picture get closer, get bigger, then a video of a snake, and then eventually you'd have a snake somewhere across the room from them, and slowly bring them up to one snake, then have them touch one snake. With flooding, you would put them in a room with a snake person who maybe had 20 snakes. So, the fact that the principal is really into the concept of flooding is very concerning to me. So having explained all that, Bonnie, back to the question, my son has OCD and the principal believes in flooding, which is driving my kid nuts. What are my kiddos' rights? Does a child have a right to say this is not okay?
Of course, if the child is responding in a way that's negative, I think the way to deal with this, I mean, you could just write the principal a polite letter and include, citations to scholarly articles about how this is inappropriate for a person with autism or sensory issues. Or you probably are going to have to, and I suppose you could try to talk to him first. And what you're going to have to say is, look, we're going to have an IEP meeting. I'm going to bring in my occupational therapist or my BCBA or somebody who can address why the ultra desensitization approach is actually regressive for the child, and I'd rather just work this out with you and not have to do it at an IEP meeting. I'm not saying this isn't good for some kids, it's just not good for my kid. And you give the principal a way to back out without public shaming. If that doesn't work, you have to do the public shaming.
Okay, and when you do public shaming, is that a lawyer? Is that calling the news?
Well,
what do you
you're
mean by that?
not necessarily. You're going to have an IEP meeting at which you talk about this and you try to reach an accommodation. And if you can't, you're going to have to go to informal dispute resolution or due process. But it seems to me that you might be able to talk the principal into a better understanding about this. I've certainly talked to psychologists that differ on the rate at which you do the desensitization, but in thinking about it and talking about it with you, it occurred to me there's, a famous scene in George Orwell's 1984 where the way they torture people is they figure out the thing that they're most afraid of. Let's say you're afraid of rats, and they put you in a closed room with 1 million rats, and the rats run over you and all this other stuff, and that's how they do destructive mind control. So right. I suppose you could mention you don't want to necessarily get into Orwell, but you do need articles that support your position that this isn't good for your child and for kids who present like your child. I think you should be able to find something.
Yeah.
But I'm rushing through the answer a little bit because we have like 5 minutes left or something.
Yes.
Good.
Exactly.
Okay, so one of my personal goals for 2019 is to get us through the California dyslexia guidelines. We started on this, and then we stopped, and we've done a bunch of other things. But I'm going to really try to get us through this by doing a little bit every week.
Okay.
And then after we get done with that, we'll do a whole unit on assessments. But information about reading and language problems has become, I think, a lot more important for the autism community, as we sort of did this for longer, and we saw that a percentage of the kids, a noticeable percentage of the kids, in addition to having problems more classically associated with sort of DSM, autism, have reading problems. And so we just got a very little way into the California dyslexia guidelines. I think it was in the beginning of 2018. Here they are. Can you see them?
Yes.
Googleable and printoutable. The first part about the dyslexia guidelines, just to sort of summarize what we talked about, is that we've learned that dyslexia is a treatable disorder, and that actually if you do dyslexia intervention for kids with language learning disabilities, and you do a pre and post PET scan, you can see that the structure of the brain changes in response to appropriate dyslexia remediation. And so, although these are guidelines and the state of California was not brave enough to direct each district to do this, which is what they should have done, this is kind of like the best practices for dyslexia and language-based learning disorders. So the discussion goes on to talk about how to intervene and when to intervene. And the point about how and when to intervene is that public schools tend to wait till second or third grade to intervene for a child with autism. And the authors of the publication say that's way too late. If you wait until the child has really glaring spelling or reading problems, you've missed a big window in which you could actually start doing meaningful intervention for the child. So in order to help with this process, they created kind of a red flags list that we're going to talk about briefly now. And while they said this is not an exhaustive list and each unique individual presents uniquely, these are some of the things that you may be able to see. So it's important for parents to kind of know what the literacy benchmarks are for the child's age and to be on the lookout for any of these problems. So now I'm just going to hit you with the list of all the things that you might see in somebody as early as preschool or even earlier. Okay, so baby talk. The child is hard to understand, or when they speak, it sounds like baby talk. That's a red flag. The child has difficulty recognizing his or her own name in print. The child has trouble following a rhyming sequence or rhyming with words. The child has lack of interest in books. The child does not understand that a book is read right side up rather than upside down or sideways or whatever. The child is having left to right directionality when looking at books. The child is having difficulty remembering the letters of the alphabet or how to spell his or her name. The child is having trouble learning his or her colors. The child is not developing an age-appropriate vocabulary. The child is having difficulty pronouncing familiar words. The child is exhibiting frustration with fine motor skills such as coloring, pasting, and cutting with scissors. The child is having difficulty learning numbers, days of the week, shapes. The child is having difficulty telling and recalling a story in the correct sequence. So I find this really fascinating because it shows us how profound the process of reading really is, and it also shows us how with a learning language-based disorder like dyslexia, it's not just reading and writing. It's other skills as well. Now, it is not unusual for preschoolers or even early kindergartners to still develop the following signs and behavior. Difficulty with anticipating later developing sounds, including S, R, V, T, H, C, H, and consonant blends such as S, W, S, T, and S, T, R. Occasional lack of interest in reading with a preference for engaging in more active play. Confusion over letter names, especially ones that look or sound familiar. So that kind of gets us up to the beginning of kindergarten, and then there's kind of the red flags for kindergarten. Should I go on?
Yeah.
Okay, kindergarten. That's when formal reading instruction begins. So students in kindergarten receive active instruction in developing phonemic awareness and phonics. So that becomes interesting too, because I'm, thinking back to the way my own kid with autism learned how to read, and it wasn't the same as my other kids, but he didn't get stuck. Like, he had a method for memorizing, I think, the way the whole word looked, as opposed to he couldn't really phonetically decode. But for whatever reason, he didn't end up with a reading disorder, except for, of course, there's the whole problem of reading comprehension, which is a sort of a separate topic. Anyway, one of the things that's a kindergarten goal is learning to recognize and sound out the alphabet in kindergarten by the end of the first semester. So if your child exhibits difficulty doing those things, that's a red flag. Kids who are more likely to have dyslexia are going to have difficulty creating, let's say, a rhyme for a one-syllable word like hat or cat. They're going to have difficulty taking a compound word like rainbow and showing you that it can be broken up into rain and bow. They have inability to separate words into their individual sounds. So dog would be d, g. Difficulty with letter sound correspondence. So let's say good, corresponds to the letter G for the first letter. Inability to remember the names of the letters of the alphabet, or consistent confusion over the letters of the alphabet. A tendency to read words with no connection to the letters on the page. Inability to track words with one's finger when following along with oral reading. See, I find this fascinating because the neurology of this is so profound. It's so pervasive. A heavy reliance on the pictures in a story to read. Difficulty remembering basic sight words like to, thee, look, and my. Difficulty sounding out one-syllable words, dog, hop, bat. The student complains that he does not like to read and is reading avoidant. Difficulty understanding segmentation. And then sort of for end of kindergarten, it's still typical to have difficulty with some of these signs really through, I guess, difficulty till the middle of kindergarten, difficulty with later developing sounds like the V, TH, and CH, and consonant blends when speaking, confusion over B and D, use of picture cues to help with unknown words when reading, use of phonemic spelling, and a tendency to transpose letter positions in high-frequency words such as W-I-H-T for W-I-T-H. I'm almost done here. Use of consistent punctuation and difficulty making letter formations correctly. Word reversal, so writing the word backwards. Boredom when listening to chapter books and a preference for picture books, and then preference for other activities over reading. And then it goes on to what you'll see in second grade through third grade, and so on. And next week I'll just pull out some for each age group. I won't go on as exhaustively, but I wanted people to see that there's really a lot to look for, and you can do it at home with your child. And then this becomes something important to bring to the IEP team. Most of my kids with dyslexia that haven't had autism are not getting made eligible for special education until second or third grade. And by the time you're a third grader with a reading disability, you're probably already developing problems with self-esteem and confidence.
And I think a lot of people, Bonnie, their child gets diagnosed with autism, and I've heard this time and time again, it's like people stop looking to see is there more going on.
Yeah.
And your child could easily have autism and dyslexia, and both of them are making it harder to get at the other one. So
Yep.
I think this is very interesting information. for parents to have. And if your child, if any of these red flags, Bonnie, where can they get they just Google
You
California
Google
dyslexia?
California Dyslexia Guidelines.
Okay, fabulous.
It's free for the taking.
There we go. And we're out of time, but Bonnie, tell us about Heerji and Chow again and how we can connect with you.
Well, Heerji and Chow is inside today, staying out of the rain, but we're really grateful for the rain here in Southern California, and we hope everybody is safe. We can be reached at 310-391-0330, and our website is lawyer4children.com.
Wonderful. We appreciate you so much, Bonnie. Have a good...
I guess I should say one more thing.
Yes.
Sometimes there's a little lull in the month of December.
Yes.
So if people want intakes, it's a good time to call.
Ooh, like hearing that.
Okay. Just saying, just putting it out there.
Put it out there. Absolutely, put it out there. Thank you so much for your time, and
You bet.
please give our love to everybody at Heerji and Chow.
Okay, right back at you. Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye, Shannon.
That's the amazing Bonnie Yates.